Hello everybody, so welcome to part 2 of responding to ContraPoints' video on pronouns. I was pretty enthused by this video in part 1, not because I thought the arguments were fantastic, because at least I thought that the thrust of what was trying to be communicated was somewhat on point in terms of what should be being tried to communicate, which is that it makes sense to say that a biological male who identifies as a woman is a woman. Now, unfortunately, we didn't really get that argument. We instead got a kind of argument that was circling around that by just saying, well, somebody might call me, and this was, I'm being ContraPoints right now. Somebody might call me a woman. Someone might call ContraPoints a woman. Therefore, it makes sense to say that ContraPoints is a woman, which you can already see. You can kind of just, if you're thinking a little bit, work out how that's a bit of a silly argument. But Contra has, tried to argue for the intuitive logic of that. There's still quite a bit of the video left, 2/3 left, and ultimately, there have been some kind of counterexamples given which I've had to deal with. So yeah, I'm not exactly optimistic, but kind of excited to see what else is going to be said. So with that said, let's just jump in.
Because an adoptive parent is, socially and functionally, just as real a parent as a biological parent, and to say otherwise is not just rude, it's false.
Okay, so there you go. The claim is that a biological parent, or rather an adoptive parent, is sociologically and functionally a parent. Now, in order for this to make sense, you would therefore have to be, for that to be analogous, you would have to be arguing, unless you're going to explain why there's some other reason we should take this seriously as an analogy, you would have to be arguing that therefore somebody is a woman if they are socially and functionally a woman. And then you open up, first of all, a huge can of worms about what exactly it means to be socially and functionally a woman. Second of all, you open up the issue of whether or not it makes sense to say somebody is functionally a woman if they are literally biologically incapable of performing some of the functions of female biological sex. But okay, so we'll just take functionally meaning performing the social functions of being a woman. But then, of course, you run into the biggest final issue, which is, how is that not a deeply sexist way to define woman? Surely feminism is about, you come back to basically the, in many cases, certainly in my case, number one issue that makes somebody do a double take and think, hold on a minute, how does this make sense with feminism? Feminism is about the idea that women can do anything, that if you are a woman, you shouldn't feel like you are constrained towards a certain role, that men and women basically are the same except for biology. Obviously there are men and there are women, but they're not separated by social roles, by functions, by temperament, or anything like that. Rather, what separates men from women is simply biology. The problem is, if you then try to say, well, actually, no, it's not biology that separates men and women, you end up coming to the conclusion that what separates men and women is social function. And that's basically, you can believe that if you like. It's not really very credible to try and pass it off as feminism.
Because they're all different types of parents, but we do say adoptive parents.
Right, adoptive parents, an entirely valid type of parent. To call them parents is not a lie.
Okay, so basically I don't really need to defend exactly what Ben Shapiro said, because I don't think, the thing is, you're right. Technically Contra's right, and also Ben Shapiro is right. Everybody's right, so I'm going to see if I can try and keep that trifecta going by just saying that yes, indeed, an adoptive parent is a parent. Again, the question becomes what you need to do now. And I assume this is what's going to happen, so, I don't want to sound too dismissive. But yeah, you want to show how does this relate to the category and, understanding of the term woman.
So yes, there are some contexts where we do need to distinguish between biological and adoptive parents. For instance, if a doctor is assessing a child's risk of some hereditary disease, they need to know if the parents are adoptive or biological. Okay,
so yeah, basically the point we made is there are some contexts, where it makes sense to stress things, other contexts where it doesn't make so much sense to stress things. And that's true. Again, I'm kind of just stopping because I wanted to make it be known that that point was being made, and I, in turn, want to make it known that we are still no closer to establishing why it would make sense to say that a biological male can be a woman. So just want to let you know that argument had been made, because, obviously, I assume this is building up to something, and therefore it would be worth making you aware that these arguments have been made, so that when presumably these arguments are then like redirected towards gender identity, we can see how much it makes sense.
He and Blair paused their argument to congratulate themselves on how civil their discussion is.
From what I've seen, a lot of your interactions with trans people, they always end up kind of ugly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There was the, I think the person's name was Zoe Tur. There was the threat of physical violence.
Well, no,
What
no.
are your genetics?
You cut that out now, or you'll go home in an ambulance.
Yeah. I remember when Ben Shapiro was threatened with physical violence just for having his opinion. That was fun. And again, like, I'm not saying that there aren't some opinions which are so disgusting that maybe you could say, you know, obviously I'm not getting into that question, but certainly something as benign as simply, I don't think it makes sense to refer to you as a woman because I don't think the way you're understanding the term woman coheres with reality. I don't think that's falls within the kind of parameters of anything that you could even consider being worth responding to with violence. Maybe there's some language which is so horrendously violent that, you know, you could say that, yeah, responding to it with violence is justified. I'm not sure, but I don't think that just, I don't agree that your use of these particular terms makes sense.
Zoe threatened you after you called her sir, and you didn't call Blair sir, did you? Why did you call Zoe sir? What kind of reaction were you hoping to elicit?
I don't know what's happening with those eyebrows. I mean, sorry, I know there's like several things going on with those eyebrows. The specific thing I was referring to was the weird eyebrow movements. This is, you will notice very, I mean, this is just a personal attack against, and I'm not saying it's a, you know, a wrong attack, but just accusing Ben Shapiro of instigating in an inappropriate way, which, okay, fine, that's irrelevant to whether or not a biological male can be a woman.
Sir is a strictly biological term. Queen Guinevere said in days of old, I knight thee, Lancelot, thou that art karyotypically male.
Okay, again, you got this weird kind of thing where it's like, yeah, sir is a term used to identify men. You don't have to know exactly what is the biological definition of somebody being a man and what, yeah, if we want to, like, the strict scientific basis upon which we decide that somebody is a man in order to identify somebody as a man and call them sir in keeping with that. So yeah, there you go. And again, this is just like the standard kind of epistemological issue that trans-identified people and, you know, advocates for that kind of identity always seem to trip over.
So what is a great way to change your mind, Ben Shapiro? Did Blair budge you an inch with her rationality, her even temper, her civility, her aesthetic?
Well, okay, here's the thing. I can anticipate the response going to be, well, it doesn't seem like it was, or did change your mind. The reality is that Blair's arguments were certainly okay. You know, they warrant being responded to, which is more than I can say for a lot of kind of pro-trans ID arguments. But even still, yeah, they're not likely to have changed somebody's mind. They certainly didn't change my mind. And the reality is that, yeah, it seems as if kind of ContraPoints is almost acting as if civility is like overrated because it didn't change Ben Shapiro's mind. But the point is, you need to change somebody's mind by being civil and also having good arguments. And I've kind of, you know, already said before, like, let's stop pretending these people are going to change our minds, you know, like, don't ever think that I'm going into a conversation with a trans-identified person being like, I you know, seriously considering the possibility that they're going to present some kind of argument that I'm really going to struggle with and is going to make me change my mind. It's just not going to happen. So ultimately, I ask for civility, not because I think it will open up the opportunity for me to explore ideas in the free marketplace and learn new facts that will make me change my mind. I ask for civility because civility is just generally a nice thing. And yeah, in keeping with, I think, the basic standards of human decency, which I would like to see others uphold. Yeah, it's not like, civility is not just like a cheat code to make me change my mind.
Because biology is the nature of the pronoun.
Biology is the nature of the pronouns? Didn't Blair just demonstrate to you that in most contexts that's not true for her? Remember the analogy of adoptive.
Okay, so basically, yeah, the claim is, well, didn't Blair show that in many contexts that's not true? Well, again, here's the issue. If, like, I've already pointed out the issue of that kind of logic of like, well, yeah, in that case, should we, when anybody, for example, is mistaken for a woman, should we always just refer to them by female pronouns? You can kind of see how that might actually be kind of objectionable. Let's say, for example, that a effeminate man is mistaken for a woman, it seems kind of unlikely because I think you'd have to go through all sorts of different kind of, surgeries to even get close to passing as a woman. But let's say it happened, that this man has just been attacked for having been mistaken for a woman. Do you therefore think it's now appropriate to refer to that man with female pronouns because them having been perceived as a woman is socially or contextually relevant to this particular news story you might write up about this man having been attacked? I think that's pretty ridiculous. The reality is that actually, first of all, the idea that like in some contexts it might make sense to say, or it might be, I guess more accurate would be more expedient to say this person was a woman, and in some contexts it might be relevant. This person identifies as a woman. Okay, I'm already kind of skeptical that therefore means we should use these pronouns. I don't think that's been sufficiently evidenced. But you also have the other issue, which is, I would argue, in a huge number of contexts, especially when talking about, for example, sex crimes, which are overwhelmingly committed by biological males against biological females, that these trans-identified males are biologically male is the most relevant thing. So obviously, there might be scenarios where, in particular news stories, it doesn't matter that this person is biologically male. That, again, I don't, it still doesn't make it untrue, but whatever. The reality is a lot of the time it is going to matter. And you can kind of, again, this just shows like another issue of this whole argument of like how socially useful, like the social utility of using people's particular pronouns in a particular situation, how fraught that is. Because it's like you now have to enter into a big debate about how relevant is it that they identify a particular way, which of course is just ridiculous.
Likewise, there are some scientific and medical contexts where it makes sense to distinguish between transgender and cisgender, or as you say, biological women.
That's definitely true. There are some contexts where it makes sense to make that distinction. What we then have to ask is there any context where it doesn't make sense to make that distinction? And I would argue that actually, in all contexts, it still makes sense to, hold to that distinction, even contexts where it might actually be more expedient to pretend that distinction doesn't exist. The reality is that if you're then going to say that should, motivate us to act as if it makes sense to pretend that biological males are women, you then open up a whole can of worms, which I've already kind of explained both in this part and the first part of this response, about how that just doesn't really make sense. So I do agree though that yes, there are plenty of contexts where it makes sense to distinguish between biological males and biological females.
Are pronouns technical biological terms denoting karyotypes, or are they part of the everyday language we use to describe each other socially? The answer is obvious. There are no geneticists studying pronouns. In fact, there's not a single biology textbook with a chapter on...
Okay, so there we go. That's your argument. Pronouns are things that we use in a social context and not in a biological context, which isn't true. Like, the reality is, again, this seems to be this very ridiculous, like, assumption that biology only extends to, like, the literal academic discipline, rather than, like, biology as an inescapable facet of the material world. Think about this, like... I mean, I'm just realizing how stupid this is. Think about this for a second. How many people refer to their pets by pronouns? My auntie is a kind of a, liberal pronouns in bio, postmodern type, and we still get along well enough personally, but we definitely disagree on that. However, one time I had a hamster, and the hamster was a girl. The hamster was a she, and somebody, I'm not going to name and shame here, referred to the hamster as an it. And my auntie said, don't refer to her as an it. That's dehumanizing. And of course, that's generally an idea. You shouldn't refer to animals as its. And obviously, if you like, you could refer to animals as theys and theirs. But of course, lots of people refer to animals as he or she. It happens like all the time. It's actually, it's very rare for me to see people, even people who ostensibly affirm the idea that transgender identities are valid. It's very rare for me to see them, say they when talking about a singular lion. I saw that lion and they did this thing. No, you'd say if it's a lion who appeared to be male, you would say he did that thing. I feel inclined to stress this point because it completely destroys ContraPoints' logic here. ContraPoints' logic is we don't use pronouns to refer to biology. And yet, in the case of animals in the animal kingdom, the only thing we know is biology. It's the only thing we have to go off. And yet, based on that alone, we are perfectly fine referring to animals by pronouns. Now, I realize some people, like by gendered pronouns, and I realize, yeah, there will be some people who say, I'm not going to do that. And those people who, affirm gender identity will be, or transgender identity, will be consistent in that regard. Lots of people who would act as if they affirm transgender identity are not consistent in that regard and will very happily refer to a dog as a he or a she, depending on the dog's biological sex. It's actually laughable for ContraPoints to suggest here that we don't use pronouns to refer to biological sex, when literally for every single other species on the planet, in the universe, let's be real here, but, on the planet, apart from human beings, that's the only thing we're referring to. The single thing we're referring to when we use he and she with reference to any other species is their biological sex. Of course, you can also point out that, while there are some, postmodern kind of archaeologists who will try to argue that because like a biological male, and we can tell from like skeletal structure and things like that, was buried with like, I don't know, something typically associated with a woman, that's an example of like a transgender caveman or whatever. The reality is, of course, we can, a lot of the time, just look at, archaeology and stuff like that, or, human remains, and say whether somebody was a biological male or biological female, and we'll often refer to these people based on that. If we say, we found this warrior buried in somewhere in the Scottish uplands, and he got into 7 different fights across his life because of, you can tell from these different bone fractures or these different bone bone markings, indications of big fighting times. And this warrior, he must have been a real trooper. Like people will happily refer to he, and literally, what's the single thing they have to go off there? Biology. And of course, let's just mention the other obvious example: babies. I watched Tammy Hembrow, the Australian influencer, and she did a rather cringe gender reveal. I say it was rather cringe because I'll include this little story just for funsies. It was supposed to be like one of those things where you get a cake baked and the sponge of the cake is either pink or blue to indicate whether the baby is going to be a boy or a girl. And she cut into the cake, and then the cake was sponge vanilla color. And it was revealed that it was an epic prank. And then she takes out a onesie, and the onesie's pink, and they were, oh, it's a girl. And it was all very poorly orchestrated and came across very awkwardly because everyone was like getting excited to kind of react to the cake. They were like, oh, can't wait to see this cake to find out what gender the baby's going to be. Really excited about that. And then it comes out as like, as it's just a regular sponge cake, and they're all confused. Like, what? Huh? Like there's just audible confusion and reaction from the crowd. And then she just kind of clumsily goes into this bag and takes out this pink onesie and says, oh, look, it's a girl. Now you might say, wow, that seems like an incredibly unnecessary tangent, but it's mostly included because I just found it funny that it was so cringy. But also because what do you have there? Well, like the whole concept of gender reveals, what is it? It's somebody revealing whether their baby is going to be a boy or a girl, a he or a she, and the only thing they have to go off is biology. And even if, you wait, you don't do the gender reveal thing, you wait until your baby's born and then you find out, or of course you just find out, whether your baby's going to be a boy or a girl beforehand, and just, tell people when they ask, if they ask, and otherwise, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, basically, the point is that even still, you're going to be, people are going to find out, oh, it's a he or a she. A he or a she. And what are they going off? not the baby's gender identity, whether the baby is biologically male or biologically female. And again, I will also point out that I strongly suspect Tammy Hembrow is somebody who, if asked, would probably say that she affirms transgender identity, and yet she's perfectly comfortable saying that if a baby is a biological female, it can just be taken as, for granted that the baby's a girl. And I would ask Tammy Hembrow, why do you think that? Why do you have that association, and why do you think sometimes that association just doesn't matter if somebody says it doesn't matter? Again, consistency would be nice. But let's tally up when ContraPoints there just said that we don't use pronouns to refer to biological reality. Who ContraPoints is forgetting exists? Babies, the entirety of the animal kingdom, and the past, people who have died in the past. In all three of those cases, there is a very strong trend for people to be quite comfortable just going off biology, using pronouns just going off biology. So yeah, sure, okay, if we ignore the fact that ContraPoints forgot that the entire animal kingdom, the entire past, and babies, that thing we literally all were at one point, exist, if we ignore all of that, then maybe ContraPoints has a good point. Maybe in ContraPoints' world, where the only organisms that exist that are described by gender pronouns are adult human beings who are currently alive, then maybe we could say, in that case, perhaps we do go off what roles they're performing in society. Perhaps we do go off, other kind of different, indications of what they're trying to present as, and kind of different associations and costumes they're clothing themselves in. We might say, well, that person's trying to look like a woman, so we're going to say they're a woman. Maybe that's what we do. And just to be generous and steal Man Contra's position further, I'm not going to point out the thing which I should point out, and I am going to point out because I'm a liar, and I am going to point it out because I can't help myself, that this creates a huge question around, so what does gender identity have to do with this? You're now talking about like people looking a certain way. What does that have to do with gender identity? But we should also ask the question, is it true at all to suggest that in this case, it's got nothing to do with biology? No. First of all, you could argue that biology is the kind of underpinning thing of all of this. Like, it doesn't really make sense to detach the idea of masculinity and femininity from biology when the entire reason femininity was invented was to create a kind of intellectual justification for the subjugation of biological females. It just doesn't make sense to detach it from that. But you also have the issue that a huge amount of female oppression, and therefore like the existence of women as kind of a class in society, comes from the sexual and physical abuse they face at the hands of men because of men's greater physical power. So again, you have to ask, are we just going to ignore that? There are innumerable like very relevant things talking about contemporary society, which you can't just detach from biological reality. So even ignoring all of the things that ContraPoints just forgot exist in the world, like babies and animals and dead people, you still have the fact that even for living human beings who are able to perform gender, that doesn't mean that we can't recognize the significance of biology. And of course, yeah, it's very obvious that in a huge number of situations, we're not going off costumes or anything like that. We're going off biology. Indeed, actually, like, for example, when I think about all the women I've seen who don't dress up in a stereotypical feminine way, why am I still referring to them as women? Because of biology. Again, the only argument ContraPoints has here, the embarrassingly, unimpressive argument, is, well, it's not literally talking about, like the academic discipline of biology when we say he and she. And yeah, I guess that's true, but again, I just find it interesting that so many trans-identified people and like people who advocate for the validity of transgender identity seem to think biology is purely just an academic discipline rather than a facet of the material world. Anyway, let's continue.
There is no such thing as biological pronouns. This is a phrase invented in the last decade to describe the misgendering of trans people.
I mean, look, I would kind of agree that there's no such thing as biological pronouns. because there's just pronouns for men and pronouns for women. Oh, and also, well, there are all sorts of pronouns. You know, there's, I mean, to be honest, maybe you could say that like plural pronouns. I mean, it's kind of like there's an aspect of biology attached to the fact there's more than one person there. Like, how many organisms are there is a biological question. So if I were to say, look at them there, obviously I might be referring to, using it as a singular third-person gender-neutral pronoun. But if I'm instead using it as a third-person plural pronoun, them, I am asserting the existence of several organisms, several human beings in that direction. It doesn't have to be several human beings. It could be several horses. Again, animals, we must remember, lest we forget, do exist. So yeah, the reality is that actually, there are, even ignoring like gender or biological sex, there are other aspects in which pronouns are biological, because you are describing the number of living creatures, living organisms, whatever particular set of organisms you're describing. You are actually identifying the number of them a lot of the time when you use a pronoun. However, obviously, it's worth noting that when it comes to just sex, which we'll limit ourselves to, yeah, it's still true that these pronouns are biological. They're describing whether somebody's a man or woman, which is whether or not somebody's a male or female. I agree that these pronouns aren't biological pronouns, rather they are pronouns which are biological. The reality is that this is not misgendering trans-identified people, it's correctly gendering trans-identified people. So yeah, that's all I have to say on that.
So, as a trans woman, I'm reintegrating myself into society as a woman. She pronouns are therefore most appropriate for me, regardless of my anatomy.
Okay, so the claim there is, I'm reintegrating myself into society as a woman, she pronouns are therefore more appropriate for me. Now, okay, this is where we kind of get into an annoying situation, because obviously ContraPoints is acting as if like lots of what has been said heretofore in the video has not been filled with all sorts of issues. And it has. We are not even remotely close to Contra being able to say that because of reintegrating oneself into society as a woman, whatever that even means, because of that, it is now appropriate to be referred to by female pronouns. We're not even close to that being something I can like accept. All I can just point out is that this is being asserted, and we have not really had a good argument for that conclusion thus far.
And just as it's incorrect to tell an adoptive mother that her son is not her child, to call me he is not just rude or insensitive. It is, in effect, false. But
okay, again, yeah, hopefully we kind of get out of this situation of just like conclusions being asserted based on unconvincing arguments.
It is also rude and insensitive, so even if you don't agree with me, you could still not. What's the harm, right?
I mean, okay, we're going to get Bench Pro talking, but I'll just say, the harm, I mean, it's about being consistent, right? Like, in theory, it's no harm if I say that, like, you're a poodle or something, But at the end of the day, that's not true, which is why I wouldn't do it. And indeed, as I've pointed out before, if there is any harm that you get from being referred to by your correct pronouns, which is to say the pronouns that describe your biological sex, then that is a harm that in essence you are responsible for, because it is your mental health issues that are causing you to respond negatively to people just describing reality to you. And indeed, if you do respond negatively to somebody just describing reality to you, that is a mental health issue. And I don't think that should even be a particularly controversial thing to say.
Teach my almost 4-year-old girl that she can become a boy, then I think that is not only lying to her, I think it's confusing her, and I think it's damaging to her psyche.
Oh yes, the classic argument. How do I explain to my child? Kill you.
Well, it's not. You notice he didn't actually say, how do I explain to my child? Rather, he said, if I did explain this to my child, then that would be bad. I wouldn't want to explain this to her because I think it would confuse her. And, I think this would confuse any kid. The reality is that that this is a confusing concept. I mean, as I've pointed out already, it's confusing to me.
You're a shitty child for all I care. That's simply not my problem. I regret every night I spent with you, Ben Shapiro. I'm in a new relationship.
Okay, so I just want to interrupt that for a second, as interesting as it was, and say that basically, the response was, I don't care about your kid. Which I guess is the logical conclusion of thinking that anybody who's concerned about children must automatically be bigoted, as obviously we love to see the think of the children thing be presented if anyone who's concerned about children must automatically be a horrible bigot. So I guess I don't care about children is the correct postmodernist extension of that. But the reality is that, again, Ben Shapiro isn't asking you to care about his kid or whatever. Ben Shapiro is simply saying, yeah, I don't want to tell my kid this because it's just going to make them confused. And he's basically saying, this is not a truth that I want to communicate to my kids because I don't believe it is true.
The second program of tonight's science fiction double feature is about a cult of chaos hell-bent on destroying Western civilization. I sure hope there's more sex and violence this time.
Okay, so that's interesting. I think this is being presented like one of those horror anthology shows, which, I'm here for. I haven't watched that many horror anthology shows, and I wish I would watch more of them because they seem like they're kind of campy fun, and this is very much reaffirming that idea. It's just I just don't have time. I spend time watching videos trying to convince me of something which I have admitted several times on this channel before I don't think I'm ever going to be convinced of. This is the point of my life. And I can't spend that doing something I'd enjoy, like watching horror anthology shows. So yeah, let's just continue with this. But yeah, apparently there's going to be a new installment, so let's check it out.
In my previous video, Nasty T-Babe likes it rough.
But I only have one objection, which is that there wasn't really anything that rough in the video, Like, so I don't think that really functions very well as a joke.
I made an argument about why it's correct to call trans women she, but I'd be bullshitting you if I only discussed fully integrated binary trans people. Everyone basically calls them by their pronouns already.
Okay. I'm here for this. I will remind everyone that Contra didn't really do a particularly convincing argument for like why, what was that, binary presenting passing whatever trans people didn't do a particularly good job at showing why we should use their preferred pronouns. But now, having failed to do that, we're getting the even more significant and gargantuan task of arguing why it is that we should accept the pronouns and gender identities of people who have a far less coherent notion of gender identity, which is of course non-binary identities and all that kind of stuff. So considering Contra literally had all of the cards stacked in favor of the case that was being made when it came to like actual trans-identified males who are kind of close to passing and more firmly established in terms of like presenting as feminine. Now we've got to look forward to the much more difficult task of arguing why this then follows for biological males who don't even try to present as feminine, or people who claim that actually they're not presenting as either and should therefore be recognized as theys and thems. So let's see.
Dingbats like Ben Shapiro have to exert conscious effort to continue the charade of misgendering them.
The transgender woman from Orange is the New Black.
I never watched that show.
I've never watched that show either, but she's on the cover of Time magazine.
Okay, yeah, that's actually a good point. And I want to address that real quick. Yeah, it is true that even I can be inconsistent on this sometimes. I think maybe I've mentioned this before. I try not to use gendered pronouns to refer to ContraPoints because it's opening up a whole can of worms. But the funny thing is that when gendered pronouns accidentally slip out, they're feminine. I hope you don't feel too horrified and kind of betrayed by that. But it's actually true that, I have referred to ContraPoints by male pronouns before when talking to other gender critical people. But the funny thing is, I do kind of like have to actually make an effort to do that. Like, it's not like the hugest effort in the world, but whereas naturally I would just refer to somebody by the pronouns where it's like, well, it's just the obvious pronouns. In the case of ContraPoints, it's not like I actually do have to put like that slight bit more mental effort in to be like biological male, therefore male pronouns. And yes, when just like a pronoun slips out kind of totally unthinkingly, it's a feminine pronoun. So basically I'm kind of in the same boat as old Ben Shapiro here. I think a lot of the time if I was just kind of like, especially considering the fact I edit my videos. If I was talking totally unedited a lot of the time, I think I would be caught referring to trans-identified males with feminine pronouns several times. And yeah, I'm sorry, maybe, yeah, that's just going to be reality. But the question is, what does this mean? What's the implications of this? Does it mean anything substantial? And the reality is, I mean, it simply, as far as I'm concerned, can be explained by two things. The first, and kind of like most charitable to kind of my own sort of, I guess, cognitive consistency, would be that I do deep down believe that ContraPoints is biologically male and therefore a man, but knowing that it is controversial to refer to ContraPoints as a man and use biological male pronouns when referring to ContraPoints, I therefore instinctively have a part of me which just is like pressured to use female pronouns. That actually it's about the social pressure to refer to ContraPoints as a woman, because to not do that would be considered profoundly like offensive, which I do think is a legitimate potential explanation that that's why I do it. So I refer to ContraPoints like casually. It's just she, like I say, oh, ContraPoints, and she did this, and I'm like, oh wait, now I've got to cut that out so people don't find out how inconsistent I am. It's possible the reason that she slips in there is because I know that if I slipped up and said the opposite thing, said ContraPoints he, blah blah blah, I would potentially risk. I don't know exactly what the kind of rules about like gendering are on YouTube, but my concern is that consistently referring to a trans-identified male as a man and using he, him pronouns in keeping with that could get you in kind of unnecessary trouble with YouTube. The other explanation, of course, and the highly likely explanation, frankly, is that it's just because I have a lot of like subconscious misogyny. So I see somebody who looks stereotypically like a woman and I think, oh, that's a woman. Again, I've kind of pointed this out before, like the claim of, well, like the idea that there is some level on which I actually consider the conclusions of transgender identity to be valid on a subconscious level, on a way where actually sometimes it will subconsciously even sneak into my actions and opinions, only shows what I already knew about myself, which is that I do have some subconscious misogyny. I'm sure that there are misogynistic biases I have, and I've certainly never tried to deny that. And with that in mind, I think it's entirely probable that that's why I refer to ContraPoints as a woman. I see ContraPoints and my misogynistic brain says, oh, stereotypical feminine, or stereotypically feminine, woman. You know, stereotypically feminine equals woman. And of course, that's not the right thing. That's a horrendously sexist thing to think. Just think stereotypically feminine woman. And yet, yeah, sure, I do that. And, you know, that's something which, spoiler alert, will become relevant when we talk about the whole, like, traps gay thing. This idea of, like, you see somebody stereotypically feminine, like, really just wearing a very obvious costume of femininity, and part of your brain, certainly for me as a biological male, you know, raised in a kind of sexist patriarchal society, part of my brain when I see that does say, it's a woman, that's a woman, because stereotypical femininity, that's what makes somebody a woman. And of course that is a horrendous thing to think. Now, I say that I have this going on. I don't doubt for a second Ben Shapiro has this going on. Ben Shapiro doesn't even have the advantages I have of actually being enthused by feminism. You know, with Ben Shapiro, I wouldn't just say his misogyny is subconscious. And with that in mind, I'm not surprised at all that Ben Shapiro will often see, like, stereotypical femininity and think to himself, that's a woman, and kind of, you know, accidentally within that context slip out feminine pronouns. So basically, just to reflect the implications of the fact that people like me, men like me, let's be honest, men like Ben Shapiro will refer sometimes to trans-identified males by feminine pronouns unthinkingly, doesn't like prove that the validity of a biological male's trans identity is so undeniable that we just have to admit it. Rather, I think it proves either, one, the kind of power of the conditioning of you can't say that and kind of the cancel culture around that, or two, and I think maybe more likely, it shows that for a lot of men, this idea of like stereotypical femininity being what makes somebody a woman is quite an ingrained thing in our heads, and it's something we need to work to overcome. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it, but certainly definitely doesn't mean that a biological male's transgender identity is valid.
Without me having to explain my gender, strangers usually default to she, her, miss, ma'am. Hey, haven't I seen your videos on tgirllove.com? But the truth is, I don't pass perfectly. I got called sir last week by the cashier at H&M. Not that I usually—
What an alpha. Let me tell you, that cashier at H&M, I reckon, assuming he was a man, must have been the least misogynistic man in the world, because even with all of the costume of femininity, he saw right through it. He said, you know what, I know that patriarchal society wants me to recognize stereotypical femininity as what makes somebody a woman, but I'm not going to do that. Have a good day, sir. What an alpha.
So between being 6'1", the horrific transsexual squawking I try to pass off as my voice—
No comment.
Your girl remains, despite my desperate, painstaking efforts, somewhat clockable. You love—
I don't want to hurt ContraPoints' feelings here, but I will point out there is a difference between clockable and somebody who is obviously biologically male, and everyone can tell they're biologically male, but people can tell that this individual is trying to look like a woman, and therefore know that it will be considered rude to refer to them as a man. And of course, it should be pointed out that if we're talking about like people who work for like a shop or a business or something like that, you know, they say the customer's always right, and I guess maybe that extends to if the customer tells you some complete nonsense like that they're a woman, you have to go along with that. But I'm not denying that a big part of it might be the genuine sense that people think it is the right thing to do to refer to a biological male as a woman if it seems like they're trying to look like a woman. That does not mean that people can't tell that ContraPoints is biologically male.
And it's true that most strangers will choose a pronoun for you largely based on your appearance. So appearance definitely matters, but in my opinion, passing, in the sense of looking like a cis woman, is really the most important thing.
You'll notice again that there's this assumption that when we're talking about appearance, we're talking about looking like a cis woman. And yet the reality is that I don't think that's what makes people use female pronouns for most trans-identified males. Rather, what I imagine makes them use feminine pronouns is recognizing that somebody is trying to look like a stereotypical woman. So yeah, I don't think that it's a case of like every single person who is, or every single trans-identified male who is referred to by feminine pronouns has passed as a woman and people genuinely can't tell that they're biologically male. Rather, yeah, I imagine that mostly people's sense of like, oh, okay, I can tell what this person's trying to do, so I'll go along with it, is a significant factor that comes into play.
What matters more to me is the kind of vibe you give off, the way you speak, the gestures, the conversational dynamic. That kind of stuff to me is what makes a person viscerally seem like a man or a woman.
Okay. Really? I mean, that's okay. Here's the issue with that. Like, sometimes I've like read books and I've like found myself thinking that the person who has written the book is a woman or indeed a man, because I'll be reading the book and it would just seem like it was written by a woman. Again, probably due to some kind of stereotypical notion I have of how men and women should write. But a lot of the time, I'm wrong. A lot of the time, the book seems like it was written by a woman, but it was written by a man, or vice versa. And then you'd have to say, okay, well, I guess so that would be an example of how like somebody might seem like a woman based on like certain like different things beyond looks. But you can notice how that's not actually a good way to conclude that they are in fact a woman. Yeah, Contra is really just giving like advice on how to tell maybe if someone's trying to be a woman, but it's completely irrational to conclude that if you think somebody's like acting like a woman, seems like a woman, that you can, based on that, say that they are a woman.
So my goal isn't necessarily to serve unclockable fish so much as to embody a certain kind of diaphanous archetypal femininity.
Good job. Very, very non-misogynistic. Good feminism. Wow. Great. Nice job. Yeah. It's just... like, I just don't understand how something like, my goal is to have archetypal femininity and still think, like, that they're a feminist, challenging patriarchy, rather than, you know, the exact opposite to that.
In layman's terms, girl dick energy. Also, I am gonna have a lot of plastic surgery, thank God. Last month I released a video called Sexy Furry.
Okay, so I just want to say one thing real quick. What is Contra talking about? Like, what is this about? Because, like, Contra's been saying, like, you don't have to look like a woman, but you have to act kind of weirdly like a woman, but at the same time, this is all supposed to be part of, like, the section of the video that's, like, touching on this idea that sometimes people won't look or act like women because they'll be, like, non-binary or, you know, like, still completely non-passable. You know, there'll be some kind of person who looks very obviously biologically male, but claims to still not be a man. That's what I thought ContraPoints was going to be talking about, but Contra hasn't talked about that and has just spent this whole time being like, well, sometimes you can look like a woman and people might think you're a woman, but then also it's about the way you act, but then also I'm going to get plastic surgery, blah, blah, blah. Let's pretend that my videos are porn.
Pounded by skinny tea, babe. And a lot of trans people got mad at me because they thought I was saying that performing your gender is the only thing that matters and that how you identify counts for nothing. But that's not what I think. I do prefer to argue that trans women are women because we live the lives of women, because I think that's a much more compelling argument than—
That is much more compelling, but, you know, here's the issue. It's a more compelling argument, right? Slightly. It's not great, but it's more compelling. But that's not— like, it's no good arguing for something you don't believe because it's more compelling, right? Like, if you're asserting that, and you seem to be asserting this, that trans identity can also be valid completely independent of how you present yourself, then arguing that trans identity is valid because of how you present yourself is arguing for a more defensible position which isn't your position, which doesn't really work, does it?
I'm a woman because I psychologically identify as a woman, which, in my experience, doesn't really persuade anyone. It's just too easy to poke holes in it. But identity definitely does matter.
I do love that. Like, this very casual admission. Like, I know this is what we do believe, but I don't argue that because it's just too easy to completely tear apart. Like, notice that was not, I don't believe this because it's too easy to poke holes in. Rather, it's, I do believe this and I recognize it's totally uber valid, but I don't argue for it because you can't argue for it. No, it's just like, and that's absurd. I don't argue for it. I argue, and I will point this out, I argue for something which is much more defensible and completely contradicts this. Arguing trans identities are valid because a biological male might look more like a woman or act more like a woman or perform the social role of a woman is totally the opposite, like contradictory to arguing, or I don't know if contradictory is maybe overplaying my hand a bit, but it's a fundamentally radically different statement from trans identities are valid totally regardless of how a trans identified person might look or act. So you're arguing for something which is, yeah, at best just totally different and, you know, effectively unrelated to the claim that you're supposedly trying to actually support and the claim you actually believe. And it's just hilarious to see somebody so openly and brazenly admit, yeah, this is what I believe. Like, I believe this, but I'm not going to defend that. No, I'm going to defend this totally different thing because, you know, I'm not a lunatic. I'm not going to try and defend that thing I actually believe. No, that thing, you can tear holes in it. Like, it's just so easy to just completely destroy. No, I'm going to defend something else. Yeah, something I don't believe. But no, I'm not going to defend the thing I do believe, because that's just crazy. Yeah, absurd.
I should acknowledge that a lot of cis people are very sensitive about anyone telling them what pronouns to use. So, I'm going to try to be respectful of your feelings and what a difficult and personal issue this must be for you.
Okay. I don't know about that. Personally, you know, if someone tells me what pronouns to use, I say, okay, I don't think that's right, or yes, that is right. But to be fair, most of the time, if it's right, people don't have to tell me that it's right.
After all, we live in a repressive political era, despite the best efforts of hero Professor Jordan B. Peterson.
Hey, Jordan B. Peterson got mentioned.
But alas, he was too late. Now we have Bill C-16, which compels speech and sends people to jail for— oh, it's been more than a year since Bill C-16 passed? Let's check in on how many people have gone to jail for pronoun misuse.
That's interesting. I don't really know what Bill C-16 was doing. I'm not sure what Bill C-16 was supposed to do. I'm not sure if, like, the fact that nobody's gone to prison because of, you know, like what pronouns they've used is just because the law isn't being enforced properly or because it was never going to relate to that in the first place. But yeah, whatever. Apparently Bill C-16 isn't so bad. I'm not sure. I mean, good news, everyone living in Canada. Turns out Canada is fine. Okay, so I watched the next bit of the video, and it wasn't really something which I thought I needed to respond to. It kind of felt like it was, you know, moving on a bit, and therefore I'm just going to leave it until next time. And yeah, we're going to wrap it up next time. This was fun. There were lots of like very wrong things said here. There's some tits outside my window. They're just flying around on the trees. I think it doesn't matter. I was going to try and identify what kind of tits they were. I did see a red kite, which is my favorite bird. I went for a walk and I saw a red kite, and I thought, yes, that's my favorite bird right there. But right now I'm seeing a lot of gulls. Usually I see loads of gulls. And I often do see pigeons, but I'm not seeing any of those. And I frequently see crows. Oh, wait. Oh, those might be pigeons. I need to get my bird watching binoculars, but those might be pigeons in that tree over there. Anyway. Yeah, mostly a gull and tit kind of day. So, whatever. Anyway, basically, what are we saying? Oh, I'll tell you what we're saying. That video, yeah, some like very entertainingly wrong things were said, and you know I'm not going to restate them all because I think the very particularly wrong things I made a point of stressing just how wrong they were, and I had a lot of fun in doing so. So I'll just say if you're thinking, no, Michael, I want you to stress again how wrong those things were. Well, guess what? You can just go back to the bit earlier on in the video where I was stressing how wrong those things were. You can watch that until you have achieved sufficient catharsis. And you can say, yes, now I feel like I'm fully briefed on just how wrong these things were. And you might think, well, I don't want to hear the same thing again. But guess what? If I stress it now, I'll just be repeating all the same things again. So, and you know, I think repeating the same point 3 or 4 times in a video is usually about my limit. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and I would like to say that I'll see you for part 3. I mean, imagine getting to this point and thinking, nah, I don't want to watch the final part, the finale. I want to watch it. And anyway, so yeah, please do like, share, subscribe, comment. That's all really good. Algorithm stuff helps the channel grow, all that kind of jazz. You can also check out Twitter. Twitter, I post things occasionally. It's not like the most important thing in the world because I'm not that active on Twitter. Gilded is you know, it's, if you didn't know, because I don't think I've mentioned for a while what Gilded is. It's like a version of Discord, except it hasn't banned me yet. I don't want to say it's not going to ban me, but it hasn't banned me yet, unlike Discord. So yeah, if you want to check out that, it's kind of fun. I'm there now, and like I do look at stuff. So I mostly like I definitely hang out in the King Critical channel on the King Critical server. The rest of the server, to be honest, is just the Wild West, but in the King Critical channel specifically, I'm there and I'm keeping order. Anyway, but apart from that, I'll also say, please do go on Patreon, especially if you have somehow sat here through all of this nonsense to get to this point of me saying, like, please give on Patreon. Because, yeah, that's, like, I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure why I'm concluding that because you've sat through everything I just said there, it means you should go on Patreon. But I feel like, in a way, it shows your dedication to this channel. And I think, you know, like, I would say put your money where your obsessive compulsion to get to the end of a video, even when the person who made the video is clearly just spending a very long time wrapping up, is. So, yeah, if you do go on Patreon, that's really appreciated. And I'll just say thank you to my current patrons. In addition to the names scrolling past on your screen right now, I would like to give a special thanks to last month's patrons, Charlotte, Sambuca, and skeptical. You're all very appreciated.